Good evening, good morning, good night, good day, wherever you are in the world, however you're doing, whoever you are, whatever you are, in this increasingly strange and surreal 2020. Welcome back to the Velocity of Now with me, your host, Thomas Sheridan, on what is ostensibly a relaunch of the Vaughn brand, as I now have the ability, thanks to your generous contributions through Patreon, to record them on a much more frequent basis because you've kindly funded this new audio equipment, this beautiful Tascam remote studio. This makes my life so much easier. It requires a lot less editing, and I have the ability now to record these shows anywhere I want without having to do complex editing in front of a computer, setting up audio mics and so on. So it's a dream come true, and hopefully I can pay you back now. Well, I know I will pay you back now with much more regular Vaughns. I'm aiming for at least once a week, and this will basically be the new home of my work. I think I'm going to take Vaughn into different places. We'll still have the same banter, but I think the most successful Vaughns, when I look back on them, were my streams of consciousness ones, or my ones dealing with Fortean or similar kind of topics. They've always gotten very good responses, and these are things close to my own heart and what I'm personally interested in. Not that we will be ignoring the media or anything like that, or what's happening in the world, because as you know, especially this year, it has been brought home to us very succinctly and sharply that, as above, so below. What's left was what's right, what's up is what's down, and what's in is what's out. So anyway, my name is Thomas Sheridan. You're listening to the relaunch in 2020, the latter half of 2020 past the solstice, of the Velocity of Now. My website is www.mossuponstones.com, and there's other links to ways you can help me. You can buy a book and so on in the description below all my videos. So thank you for supporting me and being here, and especially those of you who followed the Corona Chronicles videos that I did on this channel, the Thomas Sheridan channel on YouTube. It really reached a lot of people, and it seems to have had a very good comforting factor for people. And this is one of the reasons I want to relaunch Vaughn, because I think that it's as good for me as it is for anyone else, and it's always been a very pleasing and satisfying format, and I think it lends itself to me operating in a more conventional style of how I am in terms of conversation, where looking at the camera phone in the car was kind of a bit tricky. This is a bit more me, and it's a bit more like having a conversation. And remember, the comment box below is very much part of this conversation we have, this discourse, this dialogue. So, air your frustrations or add your comments or whatever you want to say down below, because I really do believe by talking in the old-fashioned way in the circle, like the way they did in the old druidic times where everyone sat around in a circle and no one had the floor, there was no minutes, there was no rules or regulations, and just like the symposiums or the forums of the ancient pagan world, we're part of this. I'm just here being a vessel, a kind of an oracle in a way, and you guys are the ones who are adding to the conversation. So the comments on YouTube videos are a very underrated place, I think. You would probably get some of the best discussion, if you can call it that, in comments anywhere on the internet, and some of the most honest as well on the YouTube comments. I don't know why that is, but it's certainly, I think, because there's still a sense of anonymity for people, and they can be themselves without having to say, sharing one of my videos to their Facebook wall and talking about, Quran's on 333 or anything like to do with magic or Fortean. They don't have to feel like a fool in front of their normie family members. But is anything normie today? That's the most remarkable thing. The 2020 has been a year like no other, and those of you who've read my book, Walpurgis Night, will know that I predicted in the 4 word that 2020 would be the most important and significant year in the consciousness of human psyche since 1919. As you know, I'm very much a strong believer in this notion of a secular nature to human consciousness, to the dynamics of the human psyche, just like nature returns, just like the birds return in the spring, just like the leaves fall off in fall or autumn, that human consciousness operates on a similar cycle. It's just like the moon revolves around the earth around the sun, and the sun around the galaxy around the universe. It's a constant clockwork of mechanisms, of wheels within wheels, cycles within cycles, and when you start to understand this, your life becomes far more easier, especially then if you can apply the elements that impact upon your own life in terms of archetypal forms. And this will be a big part of the show. As you know, I'm a mythology fanatic, and mythology is really the truth about the human condition expressed in forms of allegory and parables. And these are important ways to understand what happens in your own life, because our ancient ancestors were much more elegant in how they came across issues within humanity and within individuals, within a group, within a tribe, in terms of using mythology as a method of analysing and quantifying the experiences without having to place a stigma or an element of fate in terms of a negative outcome. This came later on with Christianity and the idea that you are being a sinner and a sinner must be punished, and everything is a fault, everything is a curse handed down by God as a trespass of Jehovah's law. Well, we're going to use this show, The Velocity of Now, as something of a mechanism or a seed which we will plant, which will hopefully restore a much more mythological, allegorical and archetypal sense of being and existing and life for the listeners, hopefully, as this program progresses on and as the years ahead come and go with new challenges and new wonderful things as well. This will be an undoing of everything to do with the idea of a punishment or event or divine retribution coming down. There is no terminal moments. There are no end games. What there are is the end of one cycle and the beginning of a new cycle. Just as much as the World card is the end of the major arcana in the tarot, right on its heels is the infant ego waiting to be reborn in the consciousness known as the Fool card. Now, always remember that. You will always come back to the infant ego no matter what and begin again. This takes place in every situation and every situational event within your life. You are the monomyth, and your job is to live that monomyth knowing you are a monomyth. And by living your life knowing that you are a monomyth, you have the ability to transcend most of the pain and suffering, challenges and other issues that are packed upon your life from exterior events. You're not caught in the wheels of fate. You are woven into the threads and the fabric of this reality, but those threads, those fabrics can be removed and stitched into something else. And that's the great lesson of things like the Norns within Nordic mythology, that this concept, this idea of the weaver, and once the weaver knows the location of where the thread or strand goes, doesn't necessarily determine that will be its final position. Fabrics can be recycled, and just like anything else in life, no matter what happens to you, you can recycle yourself and begin again. So here we are again in 2020, and you just couldn't make this year up. You just could not make this year up. It's just remarkable. It seems that as if we have entered into something of a psychic black hole. It's almost like we have just passed the event horizon where all the former realities and things that took place in the world have all gone and passed, and we are on the cusp of the abyss. But in the abyss is the building blocks of a new reality. If I was to throw a theory at this and an explanation to it, a very fleeting one that I would possibly throw would be that as we are approaching and passing through this psychic black hole into another reality, it could be a result of what I've been talking about for all these years, the internet becoming sentient, and as a result our consciousness is still adapting to the singularity of the internet being semi-conscious at least. And I think this is what's really happening. I think this is why the normies are falling asunder. And I think this is why we're going to be okay, because as soon as our consciousness, I'm talking about people like us, as soon as our consciousness adapts to the semi-conscious nature of the internet, I think things will begin to settle down. A lot of this has to do with things I'm talking about here. You know, Joseph Campbell, I've said this many times, has stated that the possible issues with modern man is that he hasn't developed a mythology in order to compensate for the changes in technology. And he was talking specifically in terms of the post or the later machine age, things like the television and the radio and mass communications, where with us it's a very different kind of thing. What we're really dealing with is the changes in terms of how our cognition and our cognitive functionings are dealing with things such as social media. And it's made people narcissistic, it's made people insane, it's made people vindictive, it's made people shallow, it's made people wonderful, it's made people artistic. But no matter what, there's an element of the singularity going on there. And why this is happening and why we're on the event horizon of this psychic black hole, there are numerous demons and entities that are circling this hole, waiting to grab you and jump in and hold you in there rather than you passing into a new dimension. And I think that's really what consciousness is happening, is that this event is taking us into a new dimension. And there will be, just like in any great mythological elements, there's a bad god or a bad demon or a bad king or something like that. There's always the great leveler, the Leviathan in the abyss, that how we approach the Leviathan, the bull, the Minotaur bull inside the labyrinth, is how we survive and get out of the labyrinth. In this case, get out of the singularity, which is of the internet, bringing in the psychic black hole. And once again, I think the old archetypes and the old ways just recycle themselves. Now, what are we dealing with here? Well, we're dealing with, in this case, there's no doubt about it, is the coronavirus. The coronavirus, the COVID-19 or C19, has created, even though it's coming to the end of its initial manifestation or gestation, has definitely created a COVID-19 church, a religion. It's all there for you to see. Anyone who can't understand this now, it's there. Now, ultimately, in the Western context, religion is always ultimately created via the infusion or the ongoing distillation of Jehovah. Now, you can say, well, what has this Jehovah thing got to do with COVID-19? I think Jehovah has, if I was to use a theory, I'd throw out the idea that Jehovah has now manifested, or should we say, a better way of putting it would be to reform itself, and its scattered remains by the collapse of Western Christianity in the post-World War II period, and particularly in the post-1960s period, didn't destroy the Jehovah power force. It simply adapted and moved. We've been dealing with it since the 70s within the Islamic world, particularly things like in the jihad. It's moved into that, one of its limbs, one of its arms, one of its many forms. and particularly worked on that as a way of harvesting energy. Now, before you lose your minds, let me say to you, Jehovah is not God. Jehovah is some kind of primal demon that existed from the Canaanite times, that's probably pretending to be the God of the Old Testament. In fact, I'm pretty sure of it, and Jehovah's Witnesses are even aware of it, and so are many Orthodox Jewish sects. If you read the Jehovah's Witnesses Bible, it makes it quite clear at the beginning that there's a God who creates the heavens and the earth, and after mankind, humans are created, this thing called the Jehovah God suddenly appears. And this Jehovah God is the one who starts giving the orders and begins what is an endless eon of assaults upon human consciousness and destruction of humanity as this vindictive, psychopathic God that lives in the sky. It has infused itself and moved like a cancer all through the Western consciousness, first through what it did to the Middle East and the destruction of the Canaanites, through the destruction of the Jews, leading them into Babylon, leading them out of Babylon and slavery, the destruction of the Sumerian world, then the destruction of the ancient Egyptian world, then the destruction of the pagan classical world, the destruction of the Western world, pagan viewpoint, monotheism, and so on, and it's fused itself into politics. It adapts. It's a miasmic entity that swirls and moves around into different things. It can take something that's perfectly okay spiritually, like classical paganism, and reinvent it as Catholicism, to the point where eventually you have, instead of the vestiges in ancient Rome venerating the goddess Vesta and the goodness of life, you have them transformed into, through the Jehovah infusion, into nuns torturing and abusing women in Irish laundries back in the 1940s and 50s, and making them wash away their sins as Magdalens. And this is how Jehovah moves. But as we've moved into an atheistic, materialistic world in recent times, Jehovah has had to find a new encapsulation, a new form, a new host, a new home. And I believe that COVID-19 is this Jehovah's nature demon imposter. The whole belief that there's only one God. The one God right now for most of the normies is COVID-19. The complexity of the cosmos, which is reflected by polytheism, is reduced in terms of all the problems in the Western world today being reduced to a monotheistic issue, which is COVID-19. Everybody from the environmentalists to the economists, who are just, sexed up accountants, to all the NGOs and intergovernmental organisations, from the Bilderbergs to the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, UNESCO, WHO, it goes on and on and on, have all rallied behind COVID-19 as the panacea or the silver bullet to bring forth all the aspects of globalism which they desire. It has become the new God because it quite literally is the Jehovah God force or demonic force, the holistic daemon, very similar to Azathoth in the Lovecraftian pantheon, the interdimensional daemon, Sultan at the center of all chaos. And again, we see these things reflected in the skies above us. At the same time, COVID-19 is ravaging its way across the psychic world of humans and throwing us into a psychic black hole by means of its internet, its social media. Remember, the lockdown would not have been possible prior to the internet. If there's the one thing that the internet has now done and social media has now done more than anything else in terms of its history, is not created a global village, it's created a global hysteria. And COVID has understood through the semi-conscious nature of the internet, how to do this. Jehovah's Mask. Again, the complexity. It's the complexity of polytheism, which allowed a much more holistic engagement with the natural and spiritual and psychological world, was destroyed by the monotheistic notion of Jehovah, one God in heaven equals one God on earth, equals one pope, one ruler, one sultan, one emperor, and in this case, one global crisis. COVID-19. A demon of anti-complexity and a demon of ignorance and fear. And all through history it's appeared the same way. Through both allegory and perhaps even in some cases history. You have the Adam and Eve symbolism, where enlightenment is seen as sin. And of course, this is expressed by Eve giving Adam the apple. You could open an apple and what you have are the arrangement of seeds in the shape of the pentagram, which we all know represents the same pattern between the planet Venus, Lucifer, and the Earth's dance in the night sky. And that's why Lucifer is the planet of not only enlightenment but also brightness and clarity of thought. And hence why the apple represented the system of sin that, within the allegorical sense in Genesis, drove mankind from paradise and into the wilderness. But this is purely a psychological trap. This is gaslighting on a monumental scale. We had the same thing with Moses, whatever Moses was. If he even existed, it doesn't matter. This is a classic example of the mythology being more powerful than the actual truth of things. He led his people out of bondage. He led them out of Egypt, we're told, at a time when Egypt was the most advanced nation, people, culture on the planet. And just like today, a kind of a puritanical element kicked in, and they left. They left paradise to go live in a wilderness of the desert. They followed themselves across Sinai from one desert into another. They left the paradise and the parting of the Red Sea, and them crossing the seabed without any water on top of them, to me harkens towards a concept of having left one world, gone into another, but without having been driven by the subconscious world of the depths of the ocean. There was no abyss. They walked on the seabed. There was no enlightenment from below. There was no truths that came up from the subconscious currents of the deep ocean or sea depths. Upon encountering a burning bush, handing forth these 10 commandments, came down and attacked his people who were worshipping the golden calf. That's because they realized that they wanted to go back to being pagans, and only by these Jehovic prohibitions and statutes could he control the pagan soul within them. And then the story really began from that point on, even though they all have a common root in Abraham. And the same thing happened with Muhammad. It always happens that way. It always happens. There's elements of plasma, the jinn. And you look at the concept of COVID-19 or Jehovah COVID-19. It destroys people just by even thinking about it. We now have numerous stories of suicides. Just like a Lovecraftian entity in the Lovecraft stories, they're not killed by the monsters, they're killed by the terror of coming face to face with something they can't understand or control. And how many suicides and alcoholisms and drug addictions and overdoses have we had? Because people are literally terrified of this COVID-19 coronavirus. And that's another important issue I'll get to in a minute. The naming is also an element in this. They want to appease the demon. They want to appease this new god they all worship. They have their sacred vestments, face masks, gloves, face shields. They have their confessional boxes made of plexiglass and perspex around counters. They have their ritual parades across sacred squares, and each square keeps you alive. And to trespass outside that square is a sin against COVID-19, Covet Jehovah. And you're destroyed. You're completely destroyed. And you must seek out sinners and those who have trespassed against Jehovah Covet. Report your neighbours. The ones who didn't come out and take part in the weekly Thursday night rituals of banging pots and pans and terrifying children and animals, which is central to trauma-based mind control, which is central to the destruction of the psyche in order to bring in a new version of the psyche. There's no difference between that, the TikTok videos of dancing nurses, and Moses watching the burning bush, representing the tree of life found in all pagans' religions, from the Immersal to the Yggdrasil tree to the Celtic tree of life. Just like the bovine calf, of the golden calf, the hatred of the complexities of this world. And if you told them about Sweden, it was like mentioning the Canaanites to the ancient Israelis. They were sinners. They were outsiders. They didn't exist. The Swedes were the ones who danced and gyrated beneath the golden calf of herd immunity. And there you go again, herd immunity. Their golden calf was to not follow the strict ecclesiastical and religious and theological routines demanded of the Covet Jehovah demon. A corralling of the psyche. Yes, a God who can save and destroy. And therefore, like Christianity, like Islam, Covet Jehovah became a silver bullet for the globalists. All the rituals, all the venerations, even us locked in our homes, were hermits, like old religious hermits. And we have the religious orders, the heroes, the NHS staff, the doctors, the nurses, the ones who worked through it. These were our new priest class. The bishops were the civil servants and the bureaucrats who appeared on TV every night, telling you who had sinned, who had died of the sins that day. The sins of trespass against Jehovah, Covet. This is why it didn't bother me. I was watching the whole thing unfolding and knew exactly what was happening. Jehovah was transforming into COVID-19. And this was what was really making people terrified, because they were elevating a virus into a god. And humans being a funny bunch that way, they all fell for the god, and prostrated themselves at its feet, begging for salvation from their wickedness of wanting to visit their friends and families, wickedness of wanting to have a social life, the sins of walking outside the exclusion zone. You know, way in Judaism they have wires around Orthodox Jewish communities, and there's certain times of the month where women are not allowed to walk outside that wire if they're menstruating because they're unclean. And it's like a purification thing. There's one that goes around in Manhattan, but any Orthodox Jewish neighborhood has these thin wires that go around. Well, that's the exclusion zone. That was their version. That's Jehovah punishing the Jews and keeping them inside his little corral. And it's the same thing with the exclusion zones. I couldn't move any further than 2 kilometers. That's nothing. 2 kilometers is just over a mile. And then they made us 5 kilometers. Oh, blessed be. Thank you, oh great priests of bureaucracy in Jehovah, Covet. And now I can move in the county, and soon I'll be able to move around my country. It's incredible when you think about it, just astounding. And the connections towards, I want to talk about, this is one thing that's never talked about, and the funny thing was, the only one who brought this up was Trump, okay? Trump mentioned in his big speech, his big event in Tulsa in Oklahoma recently, that he's never heard of a disease that has so many names. COVID-19, coronavirus, C-19, the Rona, as some of us calls it, or names, joke names some of us gave to defeat its power, like ping pong pestilence. Oh, I love saying that. Ping pong pestilence. And the power of language and the power of words often tell us about the state of the human psyche. And in this case, what's interesting about the COVID-19 thing that also gives it a connection to the Jehovah thing is also how it's pronounced. You look into the old Jewish Bible, the Torah, the Talmud, the Jews refer to God as YHWH, Yahweh. And the reason was they were so fearful of Jehovah that rather than naming Jehovah directly, they called it Yahweh. YHWH. They removed the vowels from Yahweh. The name Jehovah was considered so dangerous to the Jews that they not only could they not even call it Yahweh, but they had to actually even abbreviate Yahweh by removing the vowels and calling it YHWH. There's no vowels in Old Hebrew. There is in modern Hebrew. There was a reason for that. That was to stop the loss of information moving from one culture to the next. They eventually decided about 1,000 years ago that vowels were probably a good idea to bring them into modern Hebrew. And within Judaism, Jehovah was referred to most commonly as Adonai, which is just Hebrew for the Lord or the leader, which is very similar to Archon, by the way. And this is why coronavirus, the name terrified people, was transferred into COVID-19, the fear of the full name. Jehovah, Yahweh, coronavirus, COVID-19, or if you are really terrified, C-19. That to me was one of the biggest indicators that something really strangely theocratic, beyond archetypal and beyond mythological was happening, that this thing was probably a real god. And I don't mean that in terms of just as allegory. A demon becomes a god by the level of veneration. The first one to discover that, and probably the only one to ever discover that, was Jehovah. Even C333 hasn't done that. So Jehovah entered the coronavirus when it became C19. That's when it was fully charged. Before that, coronavirus was just that, a coronavirus. It was a different strands that had existed until its discovery, or from its discovery in the 1960s, I believe. It was like that C1, C2, C3, and we came to C19. It's a shapeshifter. No vowels. C19 has no vowels, just like in Old Hebrew. You just think about that. And all you have to look at the amount of people who are still saying with this, the second wave. What's the second wave? The second coming. It's all there. It's all there for us to see. The second coming is the second wave. It's just incredible. Just astounding when you think about it. The second wave is the second coming. And this is why these people live in terror. Oh, you cannot end the lockdown now. Why not? Well, because we got the second wave. Now, what you're really saying is, do not trespass against your God. That's what you're really saying. Because your God might destroy you. That's what's really, really going on here. The normies who are terrified of our economies opening up, our world opening up, or travel again, are not terrified of a disease. They're terrified of a god. A god called C19. That's what they're afraid of. The Jehovah demonic power force has reimagined itself around a seasonal flu, which shows you how dangerous the thing is and how deadly and clever the thing is. Very clever. And the greatest mistake that always happened in the past with these things is that no one really knew what we were dealing with. Oh, it's just another religion. Until they killed all the pagans. Until they're blowing up kids and concerts in Manchester. Oh, it's just another virus. Until it assembles a god force, infects the globalists who see it as a silver bullet, and they get suddenly there. This is why the popes and the priests all loved it. How anyone could ever trust the Catholic Church ever again. You're talking about the Catholic Church who claims to believe in life after death, shutting down all their churches, all their everything, in order to do what? Not to protect their parishioners, but to protect the bishops and priests. You had old people dying and or young people dying, people of all different ages, and didn't get the last rites. These were devout Catholics, because Father McGinty or Father Vito were too busy hiding away in terror watching Netflix. And they knew the old people were the ones that were the prime carriers, and it was basically, geriatric side. That's really what happened. They herded the elderly into old buildings, and it was a handy way to get rid of not paying their, again, a classic Jehovah thing. Kill all those, like if you look at so many things in the Old Testament, the Jehovah God is very specific. Let the young live, let the virgins live, and kill the elderly and kill the middle age. And that's just COVID-19. Perfect. Or kill the infirmed. And as ever, we get the same lesson over and over again, that mythology remains relevant, as it is the archetypal software of the human experience. And that's what we're currently waiting on. We're currently waiting on software, and I hate to use that simplistic term, but it's the best way of conveying the idea, that we're waiting for our consciousness to adapt as we pass through the singularity of 2020 and into the black hole abyss out the other side with a new version of our cognition and our consciousness and our psyche in order to deal with these changes which are happening in the human experience at the moment. And the part of this is the mythology thing. And so by me creating this concept of Jehovah, and it's true, I'm not making it up, I'm not doing it as an exercise, the Jehovah force has now transformed into C19. For those of us listening to this broadcast right now, what you're doing is you're now transcending it. You're transcending the fear of it in just the same way. There's two ways you can approach these things. You can satirize them. There was plenty of satire that took place during this by people who are not normies, and also you can also mythologicalize it to make it into an archetypal force. Apply it to existing mythological concepts, including your own personal monomyth, and then you transform yourself beyond that as well. And that's why, I hate to say it, but people who have fallen completely for the propaganda on C19, people who've completely, been taken in by the bullshit and the hypes, they are basically not going to make it out the other side. Many of them. Some will get some will adapt in time, but this whole thing of the new normal is really not the new normal. It's the ability to keep the Jehovah demon going. The rest of us, we don't have to apply ourselves or be partisan with this concept. We just move beyond and we do something else altogether. You hear me talking about the idea of soul tribes. Nothing's never been more relevant than that right now. Because mythology remains relevant. It is the archetypal software, like I said. The most truest thing is not only the monomyth, but the macro myth. And what is happening in 2020 is we're getting perfect archetypal vision. What does 2020 stand for? And when you go to the optician or the eye surgeon, 2020 represents clear vision. We're getting perfect archetypal vision. I find it interesting that the Prime Minister of Ireland, who is the most servile and pathetic COVID-19 rabbi possible, Leo Vidaker, is also an eye surgeon. And we had to deal with this whole nonsense of him pretending he was going back to work in the hospitals to fight the virus as a shameless, despicable public relations move. But the 2020 people, we saw right through that. That PR stunt lasted probably an hour before people were like, what the hell is this crap about? What's an eye doctor doing pretending to fight the coronavirus? And then you had all the terrified normies, the viral children of Israel screaming, oh, we have the greatest prime minister in the world, he's on the front line helping us fight. And then you have the transformation from the Hebrew version of COVID-19 into the Christian version. And what's that? Salvation from original sin by means of the vaccine. So the vaccine is the way to prevent the end of the world, the end of them all. So that's become, in the same way abortion is the sacred sacrament of modern feminists, and paedophilia is this legalization of paedophilia is the holy sacrament of the globalists, because if they can get away with that, they can get away with absolutely anything. To the normies obsessed with the terror and the retribution of the C-19 Jehovah God, the salvation, the transubstantiation is the vaccine, the Church of the Corona vaccine. Because they have a psychic bondage to C-19 and its future fears. And although in years to come people will listen to this show and say, well, this is very interesting looking back on this now and that time, it's history. No, it's not, my friends. It's not history. What this is the now. I'm not describing something that's just happening now. It will repeat. Jehovah will come back in a different cycle, but also the experiences you've had during this whole event will come back again. The archetypes will restore. The mythology will repeat, cycles upon cycles, wheels within wheels. And what you're learning in things like this is the survival mechanism for when the next one comes along. We're very blessed that we live in a post-Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung age, that those two men have given us the psychic armour in order to use the understanding of mythology and archetypes in order to transcend the impacts given to us by the macrosphere. Like I said, we're getting, those of us who are wise to this, we're getting an upgrade to our software. The void in the globalists recognizes the void within many human beings today. And the void in the NPC normies, the non-role-playing characters, recognizes also the void within the greater thing. They are them, you are they, we are one. And you're going to see this a lot more now in the future. Everything is a reflection of something else out there. Something else is bigger than the individual, regardless of whether someone who's stepped into consciousness and enlightenment, like say we have, for whatever reason we have, and the normie NPC is, we're still the macro and the minor. Another factor here is the colossal speed of this experience. When you look at the time it took from, say, the rise of fundamentalist Christianity right through the destruction of the pagan world, or the rise of Islam and the destruction of everything that stood in its path, through the periods of iconoclasm and other things like that, destructions of knowledge, and they all happened over a long period. We live in a time where time literally is moving much, much faster. And the whole coronavirus, COVID-19, Jehovah-19 experience has transformed very, very rapidly. It all really only began in March, and here we are by summer. We're already in the beginning of the end of the old ways. we are dipping into the singular. We're past the singularity. That's the main reason I've launched this show. Is that I want to document for future generations and us as we're listening to them, these changes in human psyche. Because in the future, look, we've had to deal in the past with these experiences being relayed to us by academics, and academics have not given us the voice of the people. This is the thing. It's like, this is the great thing about something like what's happening with us now. We don't know what the average person was thinking with when the iconoclasts moved into the pagan world and started smashing statues. We know that the pagans continue to exist for about 100 years afterwards as a force, and we don't know how. We don't have their words really until say Catherine Nixby's The Darkening Age. But even then, the average person, how they felt about it. This is the beauty of today. We all have a voice. In the future, if they don't destroy, well, they will destroy the internet and they'll try to put me down. But that's what, like, this data I'm giving you will exist in your mind forever. It doesn't matter if they shut down my YouTube channel, take all this away, burn all my books, censor everything I've ever done, and write my name out of history. It doesn't matter. This psychic infusion that you've gotten from these talks, if you're listening to this late at night somewhere in the dark in your headphones, or if you're listening with your friends or your loved ones, or if you're in a car driving somewhere to your job at night time, this is it's in there. It's never going to leave, and it will pass on to your children and on to the people around you. This is the power of the spoken word. It only has to be issued once. Yes, it's wonderful to have an audio or archive and this of it, but again, this is a snowball or a seed that will always unfold into something else. They'll never take this from us. They'll never wreck our consciousness. And then at the same time too, we have to be wary of people in the alternative movement. I think many of you now are probably aware of who in the alternative movement are the enemy in terms, I won't say the enemy, but the betrayers in terms of how they took the C19 thing and played all the terrors and horrors of the mainstream because of the basic Christian roots of the alternative media coming from things like the Christian identity movement in the United States in the 1960s and 70s, that there was going to be an end time, end of the world, a day of retribution. And that's all. They've transferred that to things like the mandatory vaccine. For the last time, there will be no mandatory vaccine. There might be if you have certain jobs, like working in healthcare or something. But for all of us, there won't be one. And the reason for that is not because they're wonderful people. It's because they know that 90% of society are normies, and they will line up. They'll be murdering and stabbing one another to get to the clinics with their sleeves rolled up, and that's enough for them. They don't care about us. We are off in the wilderness, and we're not important to them. And don't let anyone put you in a state of fear. I remember 10 years ago when this whole thing started, this alternative movement really started to get big on YouTube and things like that. There was always these talks of FEMA arrests. And I remember like laughing my head off watching there'd be a video made by this weekend FEMA are going to round up everyone, and all the people who have different dissidents or, you know, who watch my channel are all going to be rounded up, right? And you'd have people in Ireland who would be sitting at home saying our fathers and praying so they wouldn't be rounded up by FEMA in Ireland or in Britain. That's how terrified they were. And we have the same thing now. Thankfully it's not as powerful, but the same thing too, they're doing it again with this vaccine. Oh, they're going to knock on your door and they're going to force you to be vaccinated. No, they're not. Don't give in to it. Don't let them, because I tell you something, if you live in fear of it, it will happen. You will turn that fear of something, that which you fear the most, will be turned into a God force, and it will be manifested, if not into your life in one way, in your life into another way. Always stay well clear of the fear junkies and the fear mongers. I'm not saying be cold and analytical. I'm saying be wise. Study the situation, every situation you get yourself into in your life, as a monomyth, as an archetypal thing, and then be as kind, loving, sneaky, devious, ruthless as you have to be in order to transcend the wickedness of what's being put upon you. Lie if you have to. Pretend. If it's a wicked force, the rules of engagement are quite clear. If you're dealing with something that's honest, direct, good and loving, you approach it in the same way. You're not a Christian. You don't have to turn the other cheek. You don't have to love thy enemy. What you do is you understand it, and if you have to feed the beast in order for it to show itself by pretending they've won or they've damaged you, you do that. There's nothing indecent or unethical about lying to a demon. Nothing. The rules of engagement are quite clear. As soon as you issue it respect, it will tear your life asunder. And this is all the demons you face in your daily life. The bullies at work, the arsehole on the internet talking shit about you. Let them believe they've won. Let them believe that they're in a position of power over you, and they will then show themselves to the world as the poisonous, deranged, psychotic, cancerous, malignant beasts they are inside, and they will destroy themselves accordingly. This is what you do. You lay down when a demon is coming to kill you. You pretend you're weak, and you hold that knife behind your back, and you plunge it into its skull. When it's hubris, when it's nastiness, and its smugness kicks in, having believed. This is how you always know. How you always know someone who's infected by a demon or a very low level of consciousness is that if they think they've won, they don't, like a normal person, go, well, that's that, it's over. No, there's no magnanimity in their behaviour. They are gloating. Demons gloat. They are smug. Demons smug. But demons are excrementous beings. And how you deal with them is quite clear. You treat excrement like excrement. You give it no quarter in terms of respect. You show it no decency in terms of engagement with it. Once you've fully established the malignant nature of the ghastly beasts you are dealing with, you are then able to use any game necessary in order to defeat it. And this includes being as clandestine, as sneaky as they are. You destroy a demon by using its own energy against itself. The demon is only after your psychic energy, whether it's a super demon like Jehovah or a minor low-level demon like the entity infecting the piece of shit at your workplace who's a bully or annoying you or dickheads or those kinds of people. It's the same thing. You smile to their face, you play the game, you make them believe they've won, and then you work on a plan for their utter annihilation behind their backs. Because that's the last thing they're expecting, because they're driven by demonically infected people, as well as demonically infected macrospheres, governments, everything else. They're always driven by one thing, the concept of hubris, smugness, that their gaslighting and their wickedness is paid off. That's their armour coming down. How many times have I told you in the old Vaughan, so many things I've mentioned about demonology, that once the demon has any inkling that it has imposed a sense of power over you, it shows its true malignant hubris nature. It gloats, it laughs at you, it enjoys the belief in your destruction. You must never allow the creature to do this. The only time you let it think it's won is because you pretend you've let it won. This is how you capture them. This is how you destroy them. This is how you dissipate their energy force back into the abyss, where they're never reborn again. The demon is a liar. Jehovah is a liar. COVID-19. was a liar. Okay, that's the first hour gone by. That went by quite quickly. I'm now going to play you a remix of the Velocity of Now theme that was actually re-recorded from scratch, and he didn't mess with it in terms of sampling, by Niall Murphy, Mr. Opaque Lens. Don't forget to subscribe to his YouTube channel, Mr. Opaque Lens, here on YouTube. You know Niall from his podcast in the past. I appeared on a few of them, and it's funny, as I've gone indoors in audio, he's now gone outdoors in video. So it's funny, it's almost like we flipped roles. But he's kind of like, those of you who missed the Corona Chronicles that I did, I would suggest, I'll put the link in the comments below, to Mr. Opaque Lens's channel, and you can check out, Niall has kind of taken it over with his own streams of consciousness, and so give him a shout. But anyway, here is his reimagining of the Velocity of Now theme music, and I will see you on the other side of this little interlude, where we are going to discuss why the normies are broken. And thank you for being here on the first hour of the Velocity of Now with me and Thomas Sheridan, and I hope I've given you enough food for thought and enough interest to keep you on for the second hour. Thank you, and take it away, Mr. Opaque Lens.
Why did you break the statue?
I don't know.
What proof? Why did you break the goddamn statue? Why did you break the goddamn statue?
There's like nothing inside me. I don't exist. There's nothing in there. I don't know who I am. I have a rage. What am I?
You are nothing. Nothing at all. You are nothing. Nothing at all.
There is nothing in me. There is nothing in me. The statue is me. The statue is me.
And welcome back to the second hour of the Velocity of Now with me, your host, Thomas Sheridan. As ever, look in the description box below to my links, www.mossuponstones.com is my website, which I will be doing a lot more work on in the weeks to come. Also, there is the Patreon thing, if you can help me buy more equipment like this and get more film funding to produce more films and documentaries from a Beyond Room 313 channel. If you want to buy a book, that's down there. If you want to follow me on Facebook, that's down there. And anything else you want to need, email is also down there as well. And also, another thing I'm going to be doing with this is I want to do guests, but the thing is I'm going to be doing them face-to-face, not on video, but audio recording, because I think I like the idea of sitting down, not just with people who are known and, names and stuff like that, but also people ordinary people I might bump into in my travels who interest me, farmers, plumbers, accountants, artists, painters. I want to expand this into the stuff of humanity. And so please, this is any ideas for things like that. And one of the things you'll have noticed is at the end of the Mr. and Opaque Lens, Niall Murphy's reimagining of the Velocity of Now theme, you've heard that little kind of audio artwork of the statue breaker, the psychoniclast as I call them. And that's something I'm very fascinated by the idea as well, doing audio cyberpunk almost, magical rituals and things like that, using sounds and music and this kind of thing, script. And I kind of enjoy the idea of acting anyway. So that leads us to, if you heard that, You Are Nothing audio artwork segment, it leads us into this part of the show, and this is really, why are the normies broken? Why are they broken? How has it come to this? How has it come to this point where they are banging pots and pans and screaming for salvation, where they can see hundreds of TikTok videos of people dancing in hospitals when there's supposed to be a pandemic and bodies piled to the roof, and not put two and two together? Why are they like this? Well, this hour we're going to talk about that. Why the normies are broken. Well, first of all, my own theories on these are not universal theories. They're just me, shooting the breeze on things that I think about in my daily life, things I jot down in my journals. I'm a keen journal keeper as well as dream journal keeper, and it's something you should be doing yourself as well. And I think the main reason why the normies are broken is they are trapped. They are trapped within the old reality that's on the other side, or left behind on the previous side of the event horizon of this new world that we're passing through. Because in many ways, being destroyed by the conventions of the past is easier for them than embracing a future that they just don't know what's coming. This is why they didn't want the lockdowns to end. This is why they didn't want that. It became a fetish. Like any religious movement, they became flagellants. This is what happened. This is why they didn't want to leave their homes. This is why they don't want the rest of us to leave our homes. They transformed from religious adherents into fanatics and into flagellants. There's a flagellation in this thing of not wanting the lockdown to end. There's also, as you know, psychosexual elements of this as well. There's sexual sadism. This is what comes out of a lot of these kinds of things. When a lot of power things, whether it's Magdalene Laundries, the nuns getting turned on by torturing the girls, even the bully at work, the bully on the internet, even the wearing of the mask. There's a psychosexual element, but also transforms into a flagellistic sadisticness, sadism. All part of the normies having what they have now more than anything else is their psychic death wish. Their psychic death wish. They are the emergence of the old repetitive archetypes, the flagellants, the iconoclasts. And what's happening now? I just say they attacked the Little Mermaid statue in Copenhagen. They attacked Jimi Hendrix in Seattle. And they've attacked Luke Kelly, an Irish folk singer statue who was a socialist himself in Dublin. And this all stemmed out of the Black Lives Matter thing, this thing of destroying statues of old white men. But the same thing happened with the iconoclasts 2000 or 1800 years ago. Any statue will do. It moves. The context is irrelevant. The context is irrelevant. It doesn't matter what the statue is of. The statue will be attacked. Any statue will do. The graven image of the golden calf. What happened after Moses imposed the 10 Commandments upon them? They destroyed the idols. They destroyed the graven images. And the statues that they're attacking, and the rationale may have started off with things like statues of old white guys, slave owners, Confederate generals, even Confederate soldiers who never had a slave in their life, were probably just in the army to pay their bills, attacking them. But it's not enough. It's the statue. It's not the context, it's the statue. This is the important thing. It's a graven image to the social justice warriors and the lefties. Now, you think about a normie, the average normal person. An SJW or a progressive, say, type on the internet who pushes all the woke stuff, that's a normie who's gone malignant. I've gone malignant. An NPC is a normie who's become nothing. The cognitive functioning is now the only aspects of their psyche. All they are now is a robot. A flesh robot. That's all they are now. And this makes them extremely dangerous because they can be easily programmed or whipped up into a phobia by the Bolshevik malignant normie. In both cases, there are no guiding forces of creativity, just their own false god of hysteria. Now this is important. While it's very easy for us to sit here and say, oh, aren't we great? Aren't we amazing that we're not like those gobshites? Aren't we incredible that we haven't fallen into the normie trap? Aren't we wonderful? Aren't we brilliant that we didn't manage all this? However, there's a kind of a false hubris in us doing this, because these people exist for a reason. They're telling us as much about us by our engagement with them, as they are telling us as much about them as their engagement with statues. They are us, we are them. Up is down, down is up, as above, so below. I am you, you are me. That doesn't mean literally, but it means these experiences are shared. Regardless of you not being an SJW tearing down a statue or taking covering the Little Mermaid statue in Copenhagen with paint, doesn't mean that you're immune to that experience. You're as fully involved in that by observation as the actual experience itself. And you're observing and beholding that experience for a reason. It's not an isolated thing. It's part of what your psychic dynamics are engaging with. If you're disgusted by the vandalization of Jimi Hendrix statue, and then flabbergasted by the fact that a group called Black Lives Matter has attacked a black musician statue, you're already in the game. You're in the experience. You're not outside of the experience. This is important to always notice. It's very easy to say, I'm not a part of that. It doesn't involve me. If there's something going on with two people, I'm not engaged in that. But the fact that you're engaged with it in terms of discussing it, thinking about it, cognitively examining it, puts you in that game. And that's for a very, very, very real reason. You're supposed to notice this, because ultimately your engagement with the experience is telling you things about yourself, about all of us. This is why it's important, instead of getting upset about it, to sit back and observe, because it's all happening for a reason. And what's the first archetype for me that comes to mind? The first mythological thing is the concept of chaos. Chaos, represented by two ancient goddesses, Nemesis and Discordia, both in their own ways female goddesses of destruction and retribution, but also the birth that comes about from that. You look at Freemasonry, the whole concept of Freemasonry is that nothing is destroyed. What happens is you regather up that which has been scattered to bring it into something new. Nemesis, whose temple was recently discovered incredibly in Greece, is the destroyer of hubris. She was the daughter of Oceanus. Her truth emerges from the ocean. She is the daughter of the deep abyss. Nemesis is about the destruction of the hubris by the emergence of truths and startling realizations which erupt forth from the abyss, from the depths of the darkness. While on the other hand, chaos, represented by the Greek goddess Discordia, or Eris, as she's more commonly known in Greek, both of these goddesses were involved in the Trojan Wars. They're central to the truth and mythology and history of the Trojan Wars. And what do we first think of when we think of the Trojan Wars? We think of the Trojan horse. The Trojan horse, Black Lives Matter. What does that equal? The Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks' lives matter. That's what that's really all about. When these things happen, you look to the mythology. When these things happen, you look to the archetypes. You examine the idea, the meaning, the full nature of them. You look for signs that take place in nature, in the greater world. I've been talking now since the Corona Chronicles took off, that important archaeological and major archaeological discoveries will be made. One of them being not only the discovery of the temple of Nemesis in Greece, but also that of the temple of Vishnu in India, the husband of Shiva, the husband of Kali. Kali representing the extreme feminine destructive force when necessary to protect her children and so on. But then the purpose of the archetype of her husband is to calm her, and she reverts back into Parvati, the gentle, loving mother. But in this case, because we're Westerners, although the Indo-European thing is essentially a part of us as well, we are being told by two goddesses, Nemesis and Discordia. Nemesis is telling us to avoid destruction by hubris, to go deep into our subconscious minds, which hopefully is what's happening in this broadcast, and also you guys later on thinking about this. I mean, you should be taking down notes when you're listening to this, to the Velocity of Now. And then later on, adding your own subnotes to it. So maybe writing down a sentence, I might say, in relation to a concept like this, and then you further extrapolate upon it. Tell me in the comments. This is what this is all about. We are the circle. We are inside the circle. In the circle, no one is in charge. We get our chance to speak, so the comments is your chance to speak. The truths that must emerge from the subconscious. That's what Nemesis is telling us, or our hubris will be destroyed. Eris, Discordia, the goddess of chaos, likewise is telling us that there is a Trojan horse involved in this, while the application of both these goddesses are both heavily connected to the Trojan war myths. And therefore, what are we looking at? A Trojan horse, that there are Bolshevik elements behind this. And they're very obviously being seen. They're not even that hidden. A few months ago, when this all first started off, I did a tarot card reading during a workshop, but also a candlemancy ritual. And the candlemancy ritual revealed that behind the whole corona thing was a powerful individual with, or god force or archetype, with one hand behind its back. And what was behind its back was the truth, was the reality of what's going on. This is why you can't trust anything that comes from these surveys or any numbers that are announced on TV, because he who pays the piper calls the tune. And they will tell you what these Bilderberg's Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateralists, World Health Organization, UNESCO, EU, wherever. You will only get the results of a survey that appeases the paymaster. And that's what you really learn about. This is the transformation from, say, the normie to one of us, as there's been a thing in your life that has woken you up. It doesn't matter what. You could have watched a David Icke video. You could have seen the Matrix movie. You could have had a difficult experience in your life. You could have read one of my books. But you could have seen one of my videos. But you stepped into this level of consciousness at some point. And often it was a shock. But it emerged up from the depths of the subconscious, because there was an element of hubris in your belief in yourself as a normie. This is what normies are. This is why they slag you off, and this is why they can't deal with you talking about things that are outside the mainstream. When you tell them the C19 numbers don't make sense, and they laugh at you, that's hubris. When they say things like, we should end the lockdown now because it worked in Sweden, and they say, are you trying to kill my elderly parents? That's hubris. And who destroys the hubris? Nemesis. And our temple is found. So they're being destroyed. The normies are broken. At the same time, too, the chaos of it all, the discordia, the eris of us all is telling us to beware of the Trojan horse. Leading us towards the sanctification of the meat golem. Now, I know when I use these terms, such as meat golem, it sounds very chauvinistic. It sounds exclusive. It sounds discriminatory. But it's none of those things. They are a recognition of the realities which confront us. I'm not saying we should go out and exterminate the meat golems. That's what the globalists want to do, or hurt them or damage them or be not nice to them. I'm telling you, this is what we're dealing with. And when you understand this better, then your life is so much easier. This is one of the greatest poisons in this whole alternative scene, is that there's two things going to happen. The human race will get up off its knees and say no more. That will never happen. That's a Christian idea of salvation. And that the other thing that happen is that if you tell someone these things and the alternative subjects that we talk about, the kind of things on the Velocity of Now, enough, that they will eventually, it will reach them and they'll wake up. No, it won't happen. Everyone has to step into consciousness by themselves. Their hubris, connected to the conventions of the world they live in, has to be obliterated by Nemesis and the deep truths of her father Oceanus emerging from the subconscious to tear them to bits. Now, one of the reasons I use the term meat golem is because of the original story, the original Jewish folklore story of it. And although people talk about it a lot, it's important for me to actually now, I'm going to read to you. This is what you get in a Velocity now. You get me reading, you get me joking, you get me singing songs. And I want to read to you, and this is important I read this to you. And I want to read to you a book of Jewish folklore, which is no author named, so it's probably just some kind of general thing handed out. And it deals with the creation and the destruction and the story of the Golem of Prague. And this is a parable we have to come to terms with to understand what's going on today with the destruction of the statues. And I'll read this to you. This is the first section, called The Creation of the Golem. It was the year 1580. A priest called Thaddeus, a fanatical anti-Semite, tried again to disrupt the peace and harmony, and to bring about discord and disharmony, and to evoke new superstitions and accusations of blood ritual. Rabbi Lowe soon learned about it and raised a question upwards in his dream to find a solution to the problem how he should fight against the evil enemy. He received the following alphabetically arranged answer in reply. Ata bra golem, der wuk hakomer, yixdar zedim shewel torfe Yisrael. You shall create a golem from clay, and may the malicious anti-Semitic mob be destroyed. Rabbi Lowe interpreted the line of strange words so that he could create a living body from clay with the aid of the letters provided from heaven. He called for Yitzhak ben Simson, his son-in-law, and for a disciple of his known as Jacob ben Chaim Sasson, the Levite, and entrusted them with the mystery of how the golem should be created. Therefore, I ask for your cooperation, because for the creation of a golem, 4 different elements are required. Yitzhak, you are the element of fire. Jacob, you are the element of water, and I myself am the element of air. Together we shall create golem from the 4th element, which is the earth. Then he formed them into detail on how they must go about a deep repentance and purify themselves in order to be ready for the grand creation of the golem. On a fixed day, the 3 men went to the mikveh, the ritual bath, after midnight. This time they were bathing with special devotion, and then they went home without a word. At their homes they performed the Shazot, the midnight lament for Jerusalem, prayed and chanted the relevant psalms. Finally, they went to the bank of the river Vltava. There they looked for a place with clay, and they set to work immediately. Chanting the psalms by torchlight, they began to work in feverish haste. They kneaded and shaped the human figure with all its limbs, from clay measuring 3 ells in length. And then there was, lying in front of them, with his face pointing towards the heavens, the golem. The 3 men then stood at his feet, so they could see his whole face. He lay there as a dead body, motionless. Now Rabbi Lowe ordered Yitzhak, the priest, to walk 7 times around the clay, starting from the right side. He also entrusted him with the Zeraphim, those strange words that he should be saying while walking. By the time this was finished, The clay mass had become so heated that it radiated like glowing red-hot metal. Rabbi Lowe asked Jacob the Levite to walk around the golem in the same manner, but this time in reverse, beginning from the left side. A specific Seraphim for his element was indicated to him. When the second assistant finished his task, steam forced its way out of the trunk of the figure. The body became moist. Hair began to appear on its head, and also nails began to grow on its fingers. Then Rabbi Lowe himself walked around the golem and inserted a Shem, written on parchment, in Golem's mouth. Rabbi Lowe bowed towards the east, bowed towards the west, bowed towards the south, and then finally bowed towards the north. Then all three of them said in unison the following words: "And the Lord formed the man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being." The three elements, fire, water, and air, caused the fourth element, the earth, to become alive. Golem then opened his eyes and looked around in amazement. And Rabbi Lowe said to him, "Get on your feet," and the golem stood up. Then they dressed him in the garments of the synagogual servant, and he soon looked like the common man. Although he could not speak, later this would turn out to be an advantage. At daybreak the four men went home. On the way, Rabbi Lowe said to the golem, "We have created you from a lump of clay. Your mission is to protect the Jews from persecution. Your name will be Joseph, and you will live in the rabbi's house. Joseph, you must obey my commands, no matter when and where I might send you, to the fire, to the water, to jump from the roof, or even to the seabed below." Joseph nodded his head and made movements to show his approval. At home, Rabbi Lowe said that he had met a dumb stranger on the street, and that he had felt compassion for him, so he had taken him to the rabbi's house as a servant. But he prohibited the people in the house to use the golem for their own private purposes. Now that's the intro into how the golem was made. By the way, a Shem is the name of God placed on the scroll and put into him, into the golem. Now, think about this in terms of the meat golems today. The humans, these people, these normies, are controlled by the same kind of forces. They're a life, there's no existence in them, really, except the life that's breathed into them by their controllers, by their creators, via things like education, social indoctrination, and so on. They are merely receptacles of the information poured into them. And this is why the NPC is that version of the normie. There's no internal world which they comprehend. There's lots of normies who may not be fully conscious, but they have an internal dialogue where they think about things, they rationalize things, they create things, and they go about their lives as a result of these things they formulated in them. But they've also done it in the context of the society alone, where the NPC is very different. The NPC is just basically a functioning thing. And until it's given purpose, like Rabbi Lowe gave to the lump of clay at the side of the river, they have nothing else to do. They literally have to be programmed like a robot. So they're made from the same elements: earth, fire, water, and clay. The air, the same things, the same elements. And the controlling aspect is the same too. And when they're given orders and brought into their programming, they glow and they have heat, just like they live in amazement because they don't understand how the world exists. This is why they watch TV with their jaws hanging open. They can't understand how things come to be. Everything just simply manifests before them. And they don't speak about things at a deeper level because they've been told not to speak, just like Joseph the Golem was told by Rabbi Lowe not to speak. Now, within the story of the Golem, Rabbi Lowe had used the Golem for specific tasks which it could do. Because it had the inability to process things in any kind of existential way, it could go about doing tasks in a very robotic way, just like the NPCs. So therefore, if you needed them to provide a process that may have a normal person go, oh, I would not do this, it's unethical, the NPC will do it, simply because the NPC will not rationalize the ethical complexities involved in it. They are singular. They only go by what they're told. And we see it with the Milgram experiment. That the Milgram experiment is quite frightening, and mainly because the numbers of people involved who followed the orders through. The majority percentage, once there was an authority figure saying to them, apply the electric shock to the subject, even if it killed them, did it because they were golems who were following the orders. The authority figure told them what to do. The scientist with the white coat and the clipboard was Rabbi Lowe. They were the golem. And when they said apply the next highest voltage, even with the person screaming behind the wall, they didn't care. It's because they're just like the Nazis said at the end of the war, we were just following orders. And therefore, through the owner, in Rabbi Lowe's case, or through the globalists in terms of the normies, the meat golems and NPCs are fine because they'll do exactly what they tell them. They do, and this is the great secret this is the great secret, and no one in the alternative scene except me talks about this, is that when you hear people like all these other ones saying we're going to have the people wake up one day and overthrow the globalists, they don't understand that what they're dealing with is NPCs, meat golems. They're going to take their orders from the globalists even if they're starving. This is why you have these situations where people would, how the hell did they allow themselves to that to be done? They did it because they were meat. There's nothing inside them. They don't have anything except one thing. There's one manifestation of the NPC and the golem, and you'll all have noticed this, and you will see this in so many parodies on YouTube of them, the cartoons and so on. Is the one proto-emotion that they really scream forth and shine through is rage. The rage is brought about by a frustration of not knowing who they really are, and having a sense from encountering the rest of us, whether they be cognitive normies or people like us who've worked on building our consciousness to a higher level. We stepped for whatever reason into this level of consciousness. They rage because they know something is missing in them. And that's why they attack the statues. Because the statue is them. The statue is an anamorphic shape made of metal. But there's nothing inside it. It's hollow. And there's nothing likewise inside the Antifa NPC who attacks it. They are them. Them are they, and what they see is a reflection, and this is where this very apparent rage in the NPC comes from. And returning to the Golem story, I want to read about when the Golem became enraged, and tell me if this sounds familiar to what you see when you see these news reports and videos online of some Antifa type losing their temper, or someone screaming when Trump got elected, or this kind of autistic screaming that these types get up to. Rabbi Lowe established the custom of giving a short daily plan to the Golem every Friday afternoon because he did not want to be disturbed by him on the Sabbath unless for extremely urgent reasons. Rabbi Lowe would order him not to do anything else on the Sabbath but be on guard. Once Rabbi Lowe forgot to give his daily plan to the Golem on a Friday afternoon, and the Golem had nothing to do. It was Almost evening, and the people were preparing themselves for the reception of the Sabbath. Without any warning, the Golem was found rampaging around the Jewish town in Prague like a madman. He wanted to demolish everything that got in his way. His inactivity had made him both bored and angry. When the people saw him, they fled shouting, "Joseph Golem has gone crazy." There was a terrible panic in the Jewish ghetto, and the news soon reached the old new synagogue where Rabbi Lowe was at prayer. He ran out, and without seeing Golem, he yelled, "Joseph, stop it!" Then the people saw how Golem stopped motionless, right on the spot where he was. That moment he looked like a pillar, and all his ferocity had vanished. Rabbi Lowe was then told where Golem was standing. He went there and whispered into his ear, "Go home and lay down in bed." And Golem followed him unwillingly as a child. Then Rabbi Lowe went to the synagogue again and told the congregation to sing one of the Sabbath songs once more. Since that Friday it never happened again that he would forget to give his daily plan to the Golem, because he knew that Golem would not have been capable of devastating the whole of Prague had he not quietened him in time. Now this section of the Golem story tells you more about the NPCs and the statue iconoclast than anything else. The Golem went crazy in Prague because Rabbi Lowe hadn't given its orders. It didn't know what to do, and it became bored because there was no internal world inside it in order to be amused by itself, to create, to think. So this led to the explosion in rage, and then it went and destroyed the city. Now there you have the NPCs tearing down the statues right now, just like in that audio artwork at the beginning of this segment. The statue was me. This is what this is why they're destroying the statues. It doesn't matter. The context is irrelevant. A statue, when a NPC looks at a statue, it has the same reaction as Golem on the night of the Sabbath. And the same reaction. There is nothing inside them. The rage builds up because they haven't got their programming. As soon as they get their programming, they become calm. Motionless like a pillar, motionless like a statue. And now you know why I call these types meat golems. Because the parable, the folklore, the story, the archetype of the Golem of Prague describes the NPCs exactly. In every way. And that's why as soon as the order is given for the NPCs, the meat golems, to do something else, they will gladly do them. They're waiting for a globalist Rabbi Lowe to run out into the street or to announce online, "NPC Antifa stop it now." And this invariably leads us to what happens to the Golem in the end. And this I'm going to read again from the Book of Jewish Folklore on a chapter known as the Golem's End, and pay careful attention. Golem's End. A long time passed, and the community was no longer bothered by any malicious accusations. Rabbi Lowe invited his son-in-law, Zikzak, the Levite, and his disciple, Jacob. Both had participated in the creation of the Golem, and he told them, "Golem has outlived his purpose, and there are no more accusations of blood ritual to fear anymore. Therefore we shall take him away from this world." It was the beginning of the year 1593. Rabbi Lowe ordered Golem not to spend that night in the rabbi's house, but to make his bed in the loft of the old new synagogue and to spend the night there. This went on secretly since it was about midnight. 2 hours after midnight, Rabbi Lowe's son-in-law, Jacob, the Levite, came to the house of the Rabbi Lowe. The question whether such a dead man like Golem, or like other dead bodies, could be regarded as something contagious was raised. This was a very important question, because otherwise the priests would not be allowed to assist at the Golem's destruction. However, Rabbi Lowe decided that this was out of the question. The three men, accompanied by a servant, climbed up to the loft where the Golem was sleeping. They began the destruction process. On principle, they did everything they had done when creating the Golem, only in reverse. Had they placed themselves at Golem's feet, looking into Golem's face during the process of creation, now they would stand at his head. Also, the words from the Genesis were read backwards. After doing this, Golem was transformed into a mass of clay, as he had been originally. Then Rabbi Lowe called the servant, took the candles, and told him to undress Golem, except for his shirt. He should also burn the clothes without being seen. The stiff Golem was then covered with old prayer shawls and with the rest of the books that were kept in the loft of the synagogue according to Jewish custom. In the morning it was announced in the streets of the Jewish ghetto that Joseph Golem had escaped from town during the night. Only few people knew the truth. Rabbi Lowe proclaimed in all synagogues and in all houses of prayer that it was strictly prohibited to enter the loft of the old new synagogue. Also, the rest of the books and the hallowed objects were not to be saved there ever again. So, when Rabbi Lowe realized the danger of the Golem becoming a community, as expressed by his son-in-law Jacob the Levite, he realized how dangerous in terms of everything having too many meat golems would be, or golems, and therefore he began the destruction process. Why? Because Rabbi Lowe knew that he was not there to play God. He wasn't God. He wasn't to create a new species. That's very different than what's happened today, where the globalists do consider themselves God because they are an expression of the worst elements of Adonai, Yahweh, Jehovah. And they have created these golems for that purpose. And they don't care about them. They don't have the sense of affection almost that Rabbi Lowe had for Joseph the Golem. There was an element of almost kindness there. And he genuinely did take pity on him, even though he didn't want to bring the Golem into life. But he did, because he had to. And then he decommissioned him and left his remains in the old new synagogue in Prague, which still stands to this day. There's an interesting history about the old new synagogue, in that at the end of World War II, the SS tried to dynamite the synagogue, but the charges didn't explode. So there's an element of real Fortean mystery there too. And talking about the Golem, I just out of interest, I wanted to see if our friend H.P. Lovecraft had ever mentioned anything about the Golem, and I came across a couple of excerpts from letters which are quite interesting. Lovecraft did actually mention the Golem, and his words were, "A very flourishing, though recently quite hidden branch of weird literature is that of the Jews, kept alive and nourished in obscurity by the sombre heritage of early Eastern magic, apocalyptic literature and Kabbalism. The Semitic mind, like the Celtic and Teutonic mind, seems to possess a marked mystical inclination, and the wealth of underground horror lore surviving in ghettos and synagogues must be much more considerable than generally is imagined. Kabbalism itself, so prominent during the Middle Ages, is a system of philosophy explaining the universe as emanations of the deity and involving the existence of strange spiritual realms and beings apart from this visible world, of which dark glimpses may be obtained through certain secret incantations. Its ritual is bound up with mystical interpretations of the Old Testament, and it attributes an esoteric significance to each letter of the Hebrew alphabet, a circumstance which has imparted to Hebrew letters a sort of spectral glamour and potency in the popular literature of magic. Jewish folklore has preserved much of the terror and mystery of the past. Now, this is after he had seen the Golem movie, the original German movie, which I suggest you all see. It's in German. It's a silent black and white movie. It looks incredible, and it's called The Golem and how he came to be in the world. That's their Golem, and I wrote about the film also in Walpurgis Night. But when Lovecraft had seen it, it definitely inspired him within his own development of his own mythos. Later on, in a letter to his friend Clark Aston Smith in 1935, not long before he died, Lovecraft wrote, "I have lately read Gustav Mehring's The Golem, lent to me by a friend, the most magnificent weird thing I've come across in aeons. The cinema of the same title which I saw in 1921 was a mere substitute using the name, with nothing of the full complexity of the novel in it. What a study in subtle fear, brooding hints and elder magic, and vague driftings to and fro, the borderline betwixt dream and wakening. There are no overt monsters or miracles, just symbols and questions and suggestions. As a study in lurking, insidious regional horror, it scarcely has a peer. It does for the ancient crumbling Prague ghetto what I have vainly sought to do at my rotting Newburyport in the shadow over Innsmouth. I have never seen the novel before, but mentioned it in the article as a result of having seen the cinema. Now I perceive that I ought to have given it an even higher rating." So our good friend and my great personal muse, H.P. Lovecraft, had plenty to say on the Golem. And the story is important in the context of today, how we deal with them. You're not going to reach the NPCs who are destroying statues. But what you can do is you can understand why they are the way they are and avoid them. It's as simple as that, rather than getting terribly upset about it, constantly seeing it or rationalizing it away as a gigantic Bolshevik communist conspiracy, which it is on many levels. But remember, ultimately below that, it's the operation and the construction of an archetype. That's what that really is. The operation and the manifestation of an archetype in its current secular evental form. And that's what makes it such a beautiful thing to know, to study these things, to understand them, to open portals into the realities and complexities of life that take you to places beyond the daily drudgery. This is the creation of art. Now, the concept of the Kabbalah flourishing in the Middle Ages is very, very interesting. It's because the Middle Ages is very similar to what's happening now. It was a time of terrible ignorance where there was flagellants, there was iconoclast, there was sectarianism, there was hatreds of different races and religious and different types of people. But what came after that? The Renaissance. And that's what we are, people like us. We are the Rabbi Lows, we are the alchemists, we are the people on the Middle Ages who on the cusp of the Renaissance said, hold on a second, these artworks of the pagan world aren't false idols. They aren't hideous. They aren't devils. They are the keys to unlocking the next level of consciousness which humanity is aiming towards. And thus, that's what they became. And the same thing is happening right now. We observe the process. We know that this experience is impacting on us for a bigger reason than what we superficially experience it as being. They are us, we are them, and this has been the Velocity of Now. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to this one and doing it again. And I've had a great time making this program, not only because of the technical ability is much easier for me now to do it, but also because it's great to be back in touch. It's great to be back in the groove. So visit my website, www.mossuponstones.com. Visit my other YouTube channels, Open Source Occult TV and Beyond Room 313. And look after yourselves, take care of yourselves, and remember, Feck 'em if they can't take a joke. But you know what? Feck 'em if they can't take an archetype too. Goodbye, good day, good night. Look after yourselves, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Velocity of Now. Vaughn is back, we are back, and let's get ready to pass through the singularity, into the abyss, and out the other side into the new renaissance. I'll see you next time.